Federal agents just seized $500 million in fentanyl chemicals, the largest bust in American history.
At 3:47 a.m., federal agents executed simultaneous warrants across 17 locations in California's Central Valley and Bay Area corridor. We seized 28.4 metric tons of fentanyl precursor chemicals, 2.3 million counterfeit fentanyl pills in active production, and $127 million in bulk cash and cryptocurrency wallets. Estimated street value, $500 million. The room falls silent after that number lands. Cameras flash, recorders tilt forward, because what they found wasn't just a laboratory hidden behind industrial permits. It was a Chinese chemical syndicate operating in plain sight, feeding the deadliest drug pipeline in American history. This is the largest fentanyl precursor seizure ever conducted on United States soil. And if you think that's the worst part, stay with me. The next part is worse. Because what happened in California wasn't a single raid. It was surgery. And when the blade went in, the nation saw what had been metastasizing underneath its skin for years. You're going to see how it worked, how it disguised itself behind environmental permits, safety certifications, and polished corporate offices. How a chemical syndicate director built a narcotics empire without ever touching a single pill. And how in one night, ICE, the FBI, the DEA, and tactical teams dismantled something designed to be invisible. This was not a street gang with colors and territory. This was chemistry turned into a weapon, supply chain logistics transformed into mass murder. And at 3:47 a.m., the weapon finally slipped. The first breach hit in Fresno County, where agricultural processing facilities run around the clock and nobody questions why certain warehouses never open their bay doors during daylight hours. 3:47 a.m. Industrial corridor, fog rolling off irrigation canals like a living thing, the smell of fertilizer and diesel hanging in air so still it feels frozen. In the distance, the soft rumble of refrigerated trucks carrying legitimate produce to distribution centers, and then silence. Not peaceful silence, the kind that makes your chest tighten because something is about to shatter. Black SUVs cut their headlights 2 blocks out. Unmarked vans glide into position behind chain-link fences topped with razor wire. Above, barely visible against the dark sky, aerial surveillance drones circle in patient orbits. You can't hear them from the ground, not over the industrial hum, not yet. Agents step out like shadows given form. ICE Homeland Security Investigations teams, DEA tactical units, FBI evidence response specialists, local SWAT integrated into the formation like another muscle in a coordinated body. They move with the discipline of people who have rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in their mind. No wasted motion, no unnecessary sound, just the quiet click of equipment, the soft compression of boots on gravel, and radio murmurs that mean everything and explain nothing. They hit multiple points simultaneously: a licensed chemical processing facility with a clean website and ISO certifications, a solvent recycling company that advertises green manufacturing practices, a trucking depot with routes stretching to every major port on the West Coast, a strip mall import office with frosted windows where the receptionist works nights but never takes calls, a warehouse that on paper stores industrial cleaning agents, a hidden laboratory tucked behind stacked pallets of legitimate agricultural chemicals. The first door goes down at 3:49. It doesn't swing open gracefully. It cracks, shudders, then explodes inward under the hydraulic ram's force. Inside, the smell hits before the light does. Sharp, acidic. Chemical burns against the back of your throat like breathing glass shards suspended in air. Flashbangs detonate, white thunder in a confined space. A fraction of a second of stunned silence. Then controlled chaos. Agents flood the facility. Black helmets, face shields, weapons up but disciplined. They sweep corners systematically. They push through what looks, for a heartbeat, like any industrial chemical operation. Steel tables, ventilation hoods, safety equipment, warning labels in multiple languages. But the labels are calculated deception. The drums aren't solvents for factories. They're the bloodstream of fentanyl production. Precursor chemicals disguised as industrial fluids, shipped under legitimate paperwork, destined to be reborn as poison in Sinaloa cartel superlabs south of the border. A technician in protective gear tries to run, not in panic, in procedure. He reaches for a tablet mounted on the wall, heads for a reinforced back exit, moving like someone trained for exactly this moment. He doesn't make it 4 steps. Down. Now. The command cuts through the chemical air like a blade. He hits the concrete hard. Protective gloves smear across the floor as agents secure him. Another suspect bolts toward a caged storage area, dragging a duffel bag that swings heavy with weight. A DEA agent intercepts him in 3 strides, bringing him down as the bag splits open on impact. Not tools, not equipment, bundles wrapped in vacuum-sealed plastic. tagged with alphanumeric codes, and behind them, stacked in neat rows like pharmaceutical inventory, pressed pills, white tablets, blue tablets, pale green tablets, stamped with markings designed to look like legitimate medication. Each one small enough to disappear under a tongue. Each one concentrated enough to stop a heart in minutes. In another warehouse across the corridor, ICE teams breach a false wall behind industrial refrigeration units. The construction looks recent. Behind it, a narrow corridor lined with environmental control, temperature regulated and hermetically sealed. Server racks hum in the darkness like a digital hive, a hidden data center inside a chemical processing facility, not for accounting purposes, for operational command. Because this network didn't just manufacture and ship precursor chemical. It tracked every shipment, timed every delivery, coordinated every handoff with the precision of a Fortune 500 logistics operation. At 4:12 a.m., a confrontation nearly turns lethal. Two armed security guards in a loading bay raise weapons, hands trembling, eyes wide with the realization that their paychecks just became federal charges. Tactical teams shout commands in English and Mandarin. One guard drops his weapon immediately. The other hesitates half a second too long and gets driven to the concrete before his finger can find the trigger. Outside, engines roar to life. Trucks attempt evacuation. Headlights snap on, scattering fog like startled ghosts. A convoy tries to push toward the facility's rear exit. 3 semi-trucks, 2 box trucks, 1 white van, but the exits are sealed. Spike strips bloom across the access road. An armored Bearcat vehicle blocks the main gate like a steel fist. Agents swarm the cab of each vehicle, pulling drivers out by their collars, securing them against hoods still warm from engines that will never run again. Gloved hands find concealed compartment, false floors and trailers, dual-walled chemical drums with legitimate barcodes covering contents designed to manufacture death by the ton. By 4:58 a.m., the numbers begin crystallizing across the operational corridor. Thousands of gallons of precursor liquids, industrial-grade reagents with legitimate import documentation, pallets of commercial pill presses, dye compounds formulated to replicate the exact color of prescription medications, encrypted communications equipment, cryptocurrency hardware wallet, and cash. Stacks of cash bundled with rubber bands and wrapped in plastic. So much currency it looks theatrical, until you realize each bundle represents lives that will end on streets and in bedrooms across America. But the night is far from over, because at 5:23 a.m., inside a reinforced steel container recovered from the back of a chemical storage facility, agents find something that doesn't belong in a precursor operation. Not shipping manifests, not laboratory notebooks, not currency. A black binder sealed in waterproof plastic. Inside, printed on acid-free archival paper, a detailed organizational chart, names in Mandarin and Spanish, routing codes, communication protocols, and clipped to the inside cover, a laminated access credential for a private aviation facility in Northern California. That's when the energy in the room shifts. That's when experienced agents stop talking and start thinking, because you don't find private aviation credentials in a chemical processing warehouse. Not unless someone important travels through this network. Not unless this pipeline moves more than chemical. Not unless the people running it believe they're operating above the law. At 6:17 a.m., the scene shifts. Not to another warehouse, to a facility without windows. An FBI cyber forensics laboratory where the air smells like ozone and overworked processors. 6:17 a.m. Sacramento Field Division Secure Analysis Facility. Analysts in unmarked clothing and nitrile gloves lean over isolated workstations. Seized hard drives rest in evidence cradles like unexploded ordnance. The servers recovered from the Fresno corridor hum under controlled power conditions, their encrypted contents slowly yielding to federal decryption tool. A lead analyst, face drawn from 18 hours without sleep, begins peeling back layers of security architecture. This isn't amateur encryption. It isn't even standard criminal protection. It's enterprise-grade security with custom authentication protocols built by people who understand regulatory compliance, audit trails, and how to hide criminal operations inside legitimate business framework. The first crack opens like a door swinging into darkness. Files cascade across the screen, folders labeled with deliberately mundane names. Compliance reports, vendor agreements, shipping schedule, environmental assessments. But inside the mundane, the blueprint emerges. A network diagram spreads across the display like a nervous system exposed. Nodes connecting across continents. Chinese chemical manufacturers feeding shell import company. Shell companies feeding licensed distributors. Distributors feeding warehouse networks. warehouse networks feeding transportation corridors feeding transfer points near the Mexican border. And from there, the chemicals vanishing into Sinaloa cartel production facility, where they become the fentanyl flooding American streets. At the center of the diagram, an operation designation stamped across multiple directories like a corporate logo. Operation Jade Furnace, because jade looks valuable, and furnaces transform raw materials into something else entirely. Under Jade Furnace, analysts find shipping schedules synchronized with vessel arrivals at Oakland, Long Beach, and smaller regional ports. Container numbers matched to customs declarations describing legitimate industrial chemical, pricing structures disguised as standard commercial transactions, and then the financial architecture reveals itself. Offshore accounts routing through layered transfers across Singapore, the Cayman Islands, and Luxembourg. Ghost corporations registered in jurisdictions designed for opacity, funds moving through consulting fees, equipment leases, environmental compliance services, paperwork laundering elevated to an art form. And then one file stops the entire room. A spreadsheet of authorization codes, every shipment, every release, every significant movement signed off with an encrypted digital signature, a signature that appears hundreds of times across years of transactions. The analysts map the signature. They trace it through device fingerprints and secure connection log. They follow it backward through authentication chains. At 7:03 a.m., the identity resolves. Not a street distributor, not a cartel lieutenant with prison tattoos, a chemical syndicate director named Chen Weiming, director of a network that presents itself as legitimate international commerce, but functions as the primary fentanyl precursor artery feeding Mexican cartel production. Chen's digital signature links to port routing decisions, trucking logistics, warehouse procurement orders, customs documentation that passed through regulatory checkpoints without triggering alerts because it was designed to be invisible. And the most devastating revelation is this: Chen didn't just supply the Sinaloa cartel's fentanyl production. He engineered the supply chain, he optimized it. He transformed California's agricultural and industrial logistics corridor into a conveyor system feeding cartel superlabs. Chemicals flowing south, death flowing north. An analyst whispers what no one wants to acknowledge aloud. This isn't corruption. Another analyst completes the thought. This is command-level collusion, because the files don't just document shipments. They document strategic decisions. They show deliberate timing around inspection schedule. They show regulatory obstacles being anticipated and neutralized before they materialized. This is not negligence. It is engineered treason constructed from paperwork, powered by jurisdictional blind spots, and protected by the assumption that no one would ever examine what looked like routine commerce. And if you're watching this thinking the operation is complete, it isn't, because 8:24 a.m. brings the next phase, and the next phase is a coordinated assault. 8:24 a.m., a federal coordination center in the Sacramento region. Dawn light filtering through security glass. Coffee cups abandoned at workstations. Voices urgent but controlled. A massive digital display dominates the command wall. California rendered as a living organism. Red markers pulse across the Central Valley. More pulse along Bay Area logistics corridors. More along routes pushing east toward Nevada and Arizona. More near border-adjacent transfer zone. More around port-connected contractor facility. Dozens of targets. Then more appear. It looks like an infection spreading through tissue. A mission commander, fictional deputy director Patricia Vance, stands at the center of the room, posture rigid with controlled intensity. This is Operation Jade Furnace Interdiction. Unified federal, state, and local integration. No information leaks, no operational delays, no independent action. She doesn't need to raise her voice. The gravity of the moment provides all necessary emphasis. The operational numbers land next. Over 1,200 federal agents across ICE, DEA, and FBI task forces, 37 SWAT teams, armored vehicles positioned at primary targets, Black Hawk helicopters providing aerial coordination and rapid response capability, DEA intelligence units tracking suspect communications in real time, and offshore, in the dark Pacific waters, naval assets repositioned not for combat operations, but for something colder, the demonstration of complete territorial control. The message that California's coastline and border regions no longer provide sanctuary for trafficking networks that believed they could hide inside legitimate commerce. At 9:14 a.m., the second wave detonates across the operational map. Not one raid, a cascade. A Central Valley warehouse registered as an agricultural chemical distributor reveals itself as a covert precursor blending facility. Agents breach the loading door. The air inside burns the respiratory system immediately. Rows of industrial drums line the walls like artillery shells in an arsenal. These aren't agricultural products. These are the building blocks of mass chemical murder. A mansion in the Sacramento suburbs, high walls, security system, manicured grounds, Power gets cut remotely. Inside, a drug fortress disguised as executive luxury, hidden rooms behind moving panels, encrypted communications arrays, a safe room stocked with enough supplies for months of siege, a tunnel entrance near a commercial property boundary, buried beneath concrete that looked recently poured, opens into a reinforced underground passageway, not a crude smuggling tunnel constructed by desperate hands. A modern corridor, professionally engineered, ventilated, equipped with electrical system. A passage designed for moving chemicals and cash when surface transportation becomes compromised. A human trafficking transit location gets breached in the same hour. Quiet suburban street. Children's bicycles visible in neighboring driveway. Inside the target house, silence so profound it feels like a moral crime. Mattresses on floors, locks installed on the exterior of bedroom doors, water bottles and food wrappers scattered like the remnants of desperate survival. The kind of place that shouldn't exist, but does. Migrant smuggling convoys get intercepted on inland transportation route. Vans and unmarked vehicles pulled over in synchronized traffic stops. Drivers separated. Cargo areas open. People discovered in conditions that defy human dignity. The seizure inventory grows. More weapon, more production equipment, more fentanyl pills in various stages of completion, more cash, more server equipment, more encrypted devices, more documentation connecting the network's nodes. And then Chen's network begins its emergency protocols. Phones activate, encrypted messages transmit, burner devices get destroyed, laptops get fed into industrial shredders, hard drives get submerged in chemical baths designed to destroy magnetic storage. But the federal teams anticipated this. They were monitoring. They were ready. By 2:47 p.m., key operational figures are in custody. Customs brokers who filed fraudulent documentation, warehouse managers who maintained false inventory records, transportation coordinators who scheduled shipments around enforcement pattern, chemistry consultants who provided technical expertise while maintaining plausible deniability. All the legitimate appearing faces that kept the pipeline functioning without attracting criminal attention. And finally, the director himself. Chen Weiming isn't apprehended in a violent confrontation. He's detained in a conference room of a legitimate chemical company where he serves as a consultant. Glass walls, a whiteboard covered with supply chain optimization diagram, a laptop displaying shipping analytics. He rises slowly when agents enter. His hands move up in a gesture of compliance. His expression suggests this is a misunderstanding that will resolve itself with the appropriate legal representation. But the representation never materialized, because in 11 hours, the Sinaloa cartel's primary precursor supply chain sustained more damage than it had in the previous decade of enforcement effort. And that's when investigators realize the actual battle hasn't been against the trafficker. It's been against the system that allowed them to be invisible. The next scene isn't dramatic. It's worse. It's quiet. Fluorescent lights over evidence tables. Investigators examining seized servers, financial records, transportation logs, and internal communications. They're not searching for drugs now. They're searching for betrayal. Because a network like Jade Furnace doesn't survive on concealment alone. It survives on cooperation. They find patrol schedules, highway enforcement patterns that shifted to create unmonitored corridors at exactly the times when convoys were in transit. They find inspection stations that closed for maintenance on nights when specific shipments moved through the system. They find regulatory audits that got postponed, then canceled, then forgotten. They find internal communications. Bureaucratic language that reads like routine administrative coordination but aligns too precisely with Jade Furnace logistic. The compromises aren't speculation. They're documented. A list forms. 14 law enforcement personnel flagged for suspicious financial deposits. 9 regulatory officials with unexplained wire transfer. 3 judges suspected of procedural delays on warrant requests. A network of port-adjacent contractors who had access to shipping manifest systems and container routing database. When the arrests begin, they aren't low-ranking. A senior sergeant, fictional name David Herrera, exits a station in handcuffs. His face shows nothing. His eyes show everything. A deputy logistics coordinator, fictional name Michelle Tran, gets escorted past colleagues who refuse to make eye contact. A regulatory compliance supervisor, fictional name Robert Sinclair, attempts to explain his actions using policy language until the agent shows him his own email thread. In one message, the supervisor writes, "Postpone the facility inspection until after the 15th. Routine scheduling conflict. It reads like ordinary administrative coordination until you overlay it with shipment timing. Then it reads like facilitation of mass murder. Honest officers watch it happen like attending a funeral for someone they thought they knew. Some remain silent. Some can't stop their hands from shaking. One detective, fictional name Angela Reyes, stares at the handcuffs on a colleague she trained with and says, barely audible, 'We ate lunch together every week.' That's the violence that doesn't leave physical evidence. Not gunfire, betrayal. Because what federal investigators uncover isn't merely corruption. It's a parallel system, a shadow structure hiding inside legitimate institutions, a layer that redirected resources, buried complaints, neutralized investigations, not for public safety, for network stability. You need to understand this. This is how a chemical trafficking empire survives in a modern nation, not by overwhelming the system, by wearing it, by paying for access to it, by programming its responses. By 10:15 p.m., the federal command directive goes out internally. 3 words: final and absolute. Rebuild from zero. Because once institutional integrity is compromised, you don't repair it, you reconstruct it. But even that isn't the conclusion, because Jade Furnace was never intended to remain contained in California. It was designed to expand. Now the story expands beyond the Central Valley, beyond the Bay Area, beyond individual warehouses and trucking corridors to the continental map that Chen's network had been constructing for years. Routes spread like arterial systems. West Coast ports feed inland distribution hubs. Contracted trucking firms move like blood vessels through multiple states, concealing precursor chemicals inside legitimate freight. Environmental compliance grants subsidize facility expansions. Funding that appears clean because it supports green manufacturing initiatives. Agricultural shipments provide cover. Fertilizer pallets positioned strategically above chemical drums. Documentation describing crop treatment solutions and soil enhancement products. Shipping manifests get modified with language engineered to avoid automated detection. Industrial solvents, cleaning compounds, surface preparation agents, words that sound harmless until you understand their transformation in cartel laboratory. Intelligence analysts estimate the network could move metric tons of precursor chemicals weekly without activating alerts. Not because enforcement agencies were negligent, because the network designed its operations around the moments when oversight systems couldn't observe. Inspection schedules anticipated and avoided, audit cycles mapped and exploited, regulatory language weaponized to create protective camouflage. And underneath that commercial architecture, human trafficking and migrant smuggling operations provided additional cover. Sometimes direct business, sometimes strategic distraction, sometimes leverage for cooperation from compromised officials. Because when attention focuses on visible humanitarian crises, hidden chemical pipelines move through the shadows. Then, buried in a directory that resembles tax documentation, investigators discover the final file, a strategic plan. Chen's long-term vision, not merely to supply precursor chemicals, not merely to profit from the fentanyl crisis, to anchor, to transform California's logistics infrastructure into the permanent operational headquarters of a Chinese-Mexican trafficking alliance, a chemical fortress protected by shell corporations, property ownership, and regulatory capture, a shadow commercial government of permits, contracts, and compliance documentation, a machine designed to operate for decades. The most disturbing realization arrives without dramatic presentation. Just a sentence in an internal planning document. Once infrastructure integration reaches critical mass, the supply corridor becomes institutionally irreversible, as if the state's commercial systems could be redesigned for the trafficking network's future, not merely infiltrated, reconstructed. That is the moment that should create physical discomfort, because it means the threat wasn't merely external, it was rewriting the underlying architecture. And now, after the raids, after the seizures, after the handcuffs and the press conferences, you're left with the most difficult element, the moral weight. Power doesn't always arrive with weapons visible. Sometimes it arrives with regulatory stamps, digital signatures, compliance certifications, and silence in meetings where someone should have asked one additional question. Ambition that doesn't calculate human cost as long as financial metrics remain favorable. And the cost, it doesn't remain in evidence storage. It exists in communities, in emergency rooms, in families who wake to bedroom doors that won't open, in parents who keep a child's phone number saved months after the phone stopped ringing. Fentanyl doesn't announce its arrival with warning siren. It arrives in pockets, in pills, in powders, in counterfeit tablets manufactured to appear pharmaceutical. Cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, historic poisons in contemporary packaging. But fentanyl. Fentanyl is the weapon that transforms a single mistake into a death sentence. This story is a warning about what happens when organized crime learns to speak the language of international commerce. When a drug cartel doesn't need to fight governmental systems because it can purchase portions of them. When a chemical syndicate director like Chen Weiming can construct a supply chain so professionally documented that it resembles economic progress. And when the Sinaloa Cartel Alliance can feed on that supply chain like a predator served by industrial machinery. If you're still watching, tap like so more people encounter this story. Comment expose if you want this kind of corruption brought into public view. Because the most dangerous systems are the ones that appear normal. And the next time you drive past a warehouse glowing under highway lights, consider what might be inside. Because sometimes the most lethal empire in America doesn't resemble a fortress. It resembles a licensed facility with proper certifications and a truck departing on schedule. This story is fictional, a dramatization for storytelling purposes, but the patterns it describes exist in the real world. And the question it leaves you with is the one that matters most. What are you willing to see?